and welcome to a live coding attempt to illustrate how to implement a testable and maintainable ExpressJS app. I'm going to demonstrate the use of middleware to query a remote API, the ability to write unit tests for middleware callbacks, and we're going to use the Star Wars API for our remote API. It's a RESTful API. It's free. It's great for development. Probably most of you guys already know what it is. And there's going to be a client that we use, a Node package, Star Wars API client. It basically gives us a promise sort of interface to that API. So all the work that I'll be doing here, I'm going to be posting into this GitHub repo. I will link the video to this and this to the video when it is done. So all that said, let's dive right in. This is a blank project I created in GitHub. It's got the defaults for a node. So the git ignores for node modules and all that fun stuff. So since it's an Express project, let's go ahead and actually we're going to init the package. We're going to use app.js since it is an Express app, and Mocha for our testing framework. All the rest of the defaults are just fine. Great. Okay. Since it's an Express app again, let's go ahead and install Save Express. And let's touch app.js, app.js, wonderful. Let's make a very basic Express app here. And let's just set it up so that the home page says hello to us, okay? Very basic. And we will listen on port 3000. And of course, to make this run, I should also mention I've got a second terminal here. We'll be using Docker to run Alpine-based Node 8, which is the current long-term service release of Node. One of the best things about it is that it's going to offer us the await interface to be interacting with our promises that we're going to get from the Star Wars API. And as you see here, we're exposing port 3000 as we set up over here. So let's run the shell and go ahead and run node app.js. Now that should result in our app running. Hello you. That's exactly the response that we expected. And let's go ahead now quickly to make this actually return some data from the Star Wars API. So what I'm going to do now is stop the server, npm install save dev, not dev, sorry. Save, this is not a dev dependency. Star Wars API. Okay, Star Wars API. And while it's coming in, I'm going to go ahead and say come on now, my editor is freezing up. Star Wars API, it's exactly what we want. Okay, great. Let's make it const data equals await. Since we're using await, we actually have to use the async keyword in the function definition. So what I believe, oh, and we also need to send something. Let's just send the same data. Why not? Otherwise, it'll just hang. So let's run the app again, and let's reload. Something's wrong. let's see what's happening. So we're trying to get the people one console log data res. I don't know, actually that kind of looks right. Let's see. And yet not. Alright, so we're getting errors down here. Unhandled promise rejection swappy get is not a function. It's important to look at your docs, so let's see what we've got over here. Star Wars API. Ah, we gotta do one of these. Sure, of course. Okay. Is that it? Simple as that. Let's do that. Restart our app server. And we don't want that. Let's do reload. Great. Okay, so we've got Luke Skywalker as our response. It's exactly what we wanted. And we're also console logging that. That's really great. So now that we've got some data that's coming back, what we want to do is let's go ahead and send... let's see. This is actually, it is an object. Okay. So we can say, this is our person. And person. And we can send, instead of sending the whole object like that, we can send h1. Okay, now we're actually playing with the data that's coming back from the API. Let's go ahead and, there we go, Luke Skywalker. What I'd like to do now is, if we look at the data for people, you'll notice that we have a gender available as a property. So what I'd like to do is introduce a prefixed title depending on the gender. We'll do Mr. for males and Ms. for females. And so to get that done, we'll go ahead and say if, or you know what, we'll even do a switch. Switch. Person.gender. Say female. And when that happens, we'll say title equals Ms. Okay. And then we'll say case male. Title equals Mr. And when it's neither, we'll just say title equals hey. Great. So we will say title person. All right. So let's go ahead and test that this works. That was too quick. Let's give it a second to start. Great, Mr. Luke Skywalker. All right. So what we're doing here is this is not uncommon, and this is just a very basic and trivial sort of contrived sort of set of. Now that we've got this bit of functionality, what I'd like to do is to just encapsulate this entire thing into let's or const title. Yikes. And that way we could just simplify our template here, h1 text, right? That's all we really care about here. So what's happening here, what I'm trying to contrive is this transformation, potentially multiple steps, between the moment that we get data from a remote API and the moment that we're passing it to the render layer, okay? And you know, most applications will do more complicated transformations of this data, and in some cases may even fetch additional data depending on the initial payload. Maybe related stories, maybe, you know, earlier episodes, whatever data set that you're querying, you'll do that in subsequent steps. So what I'd like to demonstrate now that we've got this contrived little example is the application of middleware, so that we can accomplish this in individual discrete steps that can be more easily tested. Okay. So the way we'll do that is, as you guys all know, when you're doing express routes and that sort of stuff, you can actually have multiple callbacks that are associated with the same URI string. And they will be executed in the order that they are app-getted onto your Express application. Okay, so if you want to make it middleware, you actually need to add a third parameter, which is next. It's just the callback that your middleware will execute as soon as it's done doing its thing. In this case, what I want to do is I actually want to have this step. I'd like it to be its own standalone bit of middleware. And instead of storing it in a locally scoped variable, I'm going to use res.locals .person. And I'm going to go ahead and tuck it in there. And then over here, I'm going to say person equals res.locals .person. So now this bit of middleware is no longer handling the actual request to the API. Okay. Not only that, I want to break it down just a little bit further, and we'll see why this is useful in just 1 second. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to manipulate. I want to add I want to create the H1 as a step after we query the API, but before we're ready to send anything to the output, right? To the user, to requesting user. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this, and I'm going to put it in here. And once we've got this title thing, what I want to do with title, rather than title, what I'm going to do is tuck it into res.locals.title. Okay. And we'll plop this guy there, pop this guy here. Okay. Then of course we mustn't forget to call next as well. So far this is looking good. And then all we have to do for our const over here is to say res.locals.titles, res.locals.person. That's our final step, and we should now be able to have the same functional effect. Let's see that I forget to put the async. I sure did. Okay. And we no longer need the async here either, because there's no promise in there. So one more time, let's go up. Great. Let's reload. Let's see. We're just waiting a little bit longer. Looks like we might get a timeout, to be honest, on this. Let's figure, oh, you know what I didn't do? I failed to call next here. So let's do that properly. Give the server a little more time to stand up. Okay, now we're back in business. Great. So why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, let's say I want to write a unit test for this bit over here. Okay, you should realize that the way that this is implemented, okay, it actually makes a query to the remote API. In unit tests, we don't want to do that. We don't want to make calls to external services. We just want to validate that our middleware is behaving on the data that we give it in the expected way. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to break this bit of middleware out into a named function, and I'm going to give it a test. All right, so let's go ahead and set up the file system to do this. So I'm going to make their tests and make their lib, and then I'm going to touch test middleware spec.js as well as lib middleware.js. Okay, so we've got these two files, okay, and in middleware spec, what I'm going to do is, const I need expect require and then I'm going to, let's say we're going to call this add or determine title. Determine title for person. And I'm going to put should render is for female characters. Mr. for male characters. All right, so we're not ready to do this one yet, so I'm just going to skip it. And I want our first, oh yeah, right. Before we're ready to test anything, we first must import our middleware. Equals require lib middleware. So the first thing that we want to do is, well, think about it this way, right? We want to be able to call the middleware, and we want to see that it does what? We want to see that the middleware basically gives us a res.locals.title property, and it's going to be one of these values. Okay, so what we're going to say is, all right. So let's go step by step. Res.locals.title. Expect res.locals.title. To be a string. Now, of course, this is going to fail. But I haven't even installed npm install save dev mocha chai. All right, now that we have these installed, let's go ahead and run npm test. This should fail because res is not defined. The first of many errors that we're going to run into. So let's go ahead and take care of the situation. Well, of course, when we have to call the middleware, right? So how does middleware work? We got to say, okay, middleware dot. I'm going to copy the string. Okay. And the middleware is going to want a request. It's going to want a response. It's going to want a callback, which is going to be our opportunity. Since the callback gets executed after the middleware has done its thing, and what we're trying to test is the thing that it does, we want to just give it a callback here, which will run our assertion, okay? And because this is, we're using callbacks, you guys know well and good already, I'm sure, that we need to treat this as an async test, okay? But we're not done yet, right? Because we're passing a request and a response object, okay, which have not been defined. So let's take care of that right now. Const request const response. Okay. Now we'll get different errors. It'll fail again, but let's check out why now. Okay, so this isn't a function. Let's make it a function. The first thing that we're going to do is go back into our app.js. This is our callback that we're trying to test, okay? So let's take it out from here and let's put it into middleware.js module exports. And we'll do a few of them here. I forgot what the name is, but let's paste our implementation. Let's find the name that we gave it. Okay, that's the name that we gave it. And now we're going to do an import of that same bit of middleware here, so we have access to it. Okay. So now that we've got it, we're going to say middleware dot determine for person. All right. This is just a reference to the function that we've defined. Okay. We haven't changed anything about its implementation. We've just given it a name, put it into a module, and let it be in a standalone file over here. Okay. Back to our tests. Okay. Now we should find that we get rid of this error. We'll have a different error. Spoiler alert. Okay, so we can't read person of undefined. Let's look at our implementation. Where are we expecting to find person? In res.locals.person. Okay, that means that we need to create res.locals person, and that needs to be an object. Okay. We're going to fail again, but just for the purposes of illustrating so we can understand. Oh no, we're not failing again. So this is interesting. Res.locals.title. It is not a string. Not to be undefined. Let's try this. I don't know why that failed. Ms. Why are we passing? Expect not to be undefined. Oh, we're actually okay. Yes, quite. The reason why it's passing is because we're actually doing this thing over here. So let's actually just quickly call next over here and return, just so that we can try for failure. Great. So that is what we're expecting to do right now. Okay. So we want to make it defined. Person.gender. And let's, for now, let's just make this throw for the purposes of our unit tests. Okay. Okay. We have a failure. And let me also actually introduce, it should throw when gender is unspecified. Okay. So what we'll do is copy this. Similarly, all sorts of behavior that we're testing right now. And let's skip this for the moment as well. Determine. So right now we gender would be unspecified, right? Which means that we should be throwing here. How do we do this? We'll do, this is a little bit different. So we're going to expect, the way to test this in whether or not code throws an error in Mocha is to put it in a callback like this. So expect, and then you have an anonymous callback, and then somewhere in the execution of this function body, an exception should be thrown. Okay. So what we're going to do is attempt to call middleware determine title for person, give it this sort of fun stuff. Okay. And because we've failed to specify a gender here, our expectation is that this will indeed throw. Okay. And I don't want an expect in there. Okay. I don't even think we need this done, to be honest. Let me comment it out. So let's npm test. Passing. Let's just make sure that it also, that it doesn't pass when we're expecting it not to throw. Okay, expected not to throw, but was thrown. Great. That just means that that totally threw an error. Okay, great. So let's get that back. Okay, beautiful. Now, back to developing this. Okay. Expect the undefined not to be undefined. So let's take care of this, right? So we want res locals titles to have to have a value, and that should be the result of having run this. We should now, as a result of having run this middleware, there should be a value for that. So let's go ahead and npm test. All right. So what's happening now? Now we're hitting again because we haven't set up a person object with a gender so that it can properly be matched by the switch statement. So let's go ahead and add that bit too. Gender. Okay. npm test. All right. Now we've got a successfully passing test. watch this. If just for shits and giggles, let's use mail. That should fail. No. That is incorrect. Oh, no, sorry. Indeed. Because all we're doing is testing that it's incorrect. Expect res.locals. Let's do this. Title to equal Ms. Well, let's actually do that incorrectly first so we can get a failure. Okay, let's make it work correctly. Awesome. And then let's do the same test. This will fail because it shouldn't match, right? Now, when we make it mail, done is not defined. That's because of this. Okay. So what have we done so far? We have effectively demonstrated that given a correct gender information from the whoever the person is that we got from the API, we are able to get expected side effects. In this case, we want res.locals.title to have a value at all to begin with, and also the correct value that matches the gender that we're expecting. Finally, of course, we can also finally, let's also have our middleware complain if we haven't set the person object. Okay, so what we want to do is, if res locals.person is undefined, we want it to throw. Okay, so we should actually throw when res locals person is undefined. Okay, and so the test that we're going to do here is res locals. We're just going to remove this altogether, okay, and just make it an object like that. Now we're going to expect this condition, so res.locals, right? There is no person, so it's an undefined object. When we call this, we're expecting that this will throw, okay? And I believe it's actually going to pass that test. Why is it going to pass that test? So let's see. Oh, okay, right. So that is not why it's throwing. It is throwing because we're getting there. I want to revert this back to res locals title equals hey. Okay. Because if it's not a male nor a female, then we'll just say hey to whatever the person is. now we should have a test failure, an expected test failure, because nothing should even be throwing. Why? Why, my friend? Why? Let's get more specific. We want it to throw with something person in the person. Okay, this should fail. So this is going to check that when it throws, the error message includes the word person. So now we should get a test failure. Thank you. If we go back here, we'll say if person equals undefined throw error. This middleware requires res locals person to be defined. Okay, now we're passing our tests. So here we can see how we're able to validate the behavior of middleware using Mocha, okay, and we're doing so by actually calling the functions with mock request and response objects that we're setting up this way. The last thing that I want to show you about mocking and testing middleware is a great library called Sign-On Express Mock. All right, so we're going to go ahead and install these in our project. But before we do, just to get a quick look about what it basically looks like, is you can mock a request and mock a response, and what it winds up doing is creating mock objects which have the same properties and methods that are available on actual Express requests and response objects. Okay, so just to illustrate what that looks like, we'll go ahead and do that. And now that we've got these guys installed, we'll pull them in Express mocks. Express mock. Okay. And instead of this, we'll say Express mocks mock request. And then we'll say Express mocks mock response. And then we'll say res.locals. Oh, we don't even need to specify res.locals, right? So if we copy this, paste them up here, get rid of that guy, and we simplify this as follows. And of course, let's make sure that our tests are still running. Great. And we'll do this. Great. And that's a really useful library for getting a little more complicated with requests and responses and middleware unit tests. The last thing I want to show is how we can implement the last thing I want to show is how we can use the app express object to create and save references to services that we might want to use in our app, right? So the first thing I want to do is actually introduce a little bit of logging into our app over here. We'll use Winston, which is a fairly standard and popular logging solution in Express. So we will, in Node. So we'll go ahead and install Winston. And as that's happening, we'll const all right. And then we'll also configure Winston, okay? We'll Winston configure transports So now we should be able to say Winston info hello. Let's just check to ensure that we've got that working. Great, we got that there, okay? So Winston is in there. What I'm going to now do is save a reference to Winston using AppSet logger Winston. Okay. Now that this is available, right? Of course, we can do app.get logger info. This works too, which is very uninteresting, but just to demonstrate that it works, well, AppSet logger, app.get logger. Let's see. Of course, I have to remember to do that after I've declared the app variable. And this works too. All right. But that's not interesting. What is interesting, however, is that in your middleware, both the request and the response objects have an app object. Okay? And you can call AppSet and AppGet on those as well. And well, guess what this does? We can logger error all looks good with the title, and then we'll say res locals title. Okay, so if I cancel the app and go ahead and run it again, let's go back to our response here. All looks good with the title Mr. Okay, we're able to not only pass in stuff like loggers, but I would even highly recommend using that to for the instance of the Star Wars API. So what we're going to do now is say AppSet swappy. Why not keep a reference of it here, right? So we're also going to say AppSet swappy. Okay. That also means that we can move this guy out of here as well. So let's do that. Middleware query swappy. I'll define that here. Beautiful. And well, of course, we can't use swappy like this because let's see what happens if we try it. Run the Node app. I'll go ahead and look. We've got the error happening over here. It took a while for the client side to understand that, but what we need to do before we can use swappy now is const app-get swappy. All right. Now that we've done that, we should have everything that we need. Something's timing out. Let's see. Get swappy. Wait, swappy get. No. Oh, what's happening? Oh, did we not restart it? Let's try that one more time. No, it looks like there's an error that I've still got. Let me find it here. App.get swappy. Res locals person swappy get. Yeah. Let's go back here. That'll do it. One more time. Oh, come on. Still not happy. AppSet swappy. Is that not right? Yep, that is correct. App is not defined, so let's one more time. What did I do? Of course, request app get. Come on. There we go. All right. So that's basically it in a nutshell. What did we cover today? We basically took a look at how to create middleware that is testable. You know, one last thing worth actually looking at is since now we're using the request.app.get swappy right over here. There's actually one, you know, the mock objects, it's worth noting, don't include the app object in the request. But that's super easy to take care of. So let's go ahead and add one last thing here. So we're going to describe query swappy. Okay. And in here, we're just going to say it should call the API's get method. So here we're actually going to use sign on to create a mock that can help us validate this behavior. Okay, and we want to call it with people. So what's our expectation? So we're going to say const swappy equals sign on spy. No, we're gonna say get and indeed that's actually sign on spy. And then we're going to say we're going to create const app express. We're going to create an express app just inside this test over here, which also means that we need to const express require express in here. Okay, and we also need to require sign on or sin on. Const sin on. And let's call our middleware. Middleware query swappy request response, and then our callback where we validate. Okay. In here, we're going to say expect that swappy dot get called with people to be true. Let's just say called. Okay. And then we're gonna go ahead and create our mocks, right? Like this, like this. And we'll say equals res.app equals app. Okay. So let's go ahead and npm test it. No, we might pass. Okay. Let's see. Can I? So the first thing that we're seeing here actually is that since we added, we weren't running our test the whole time, right? So we're actually calling request.app.get. Okay. We need to make sure to update our unit test so that the request object has an app property. Okay. So that's actually going to wind up being a thing that we do here. Actually, I'm going to, since that's the case, I'm going to add this guy to all of our calls here. Okay. And in fact, I'm going to set it up as a before each. So before each, oh, that's not the way it works. Before each, we're going to go ahead and say app equals express. We're going to get clean this, remove that. Now, within a particular describe block, all of the its happen sequentially. These won't run asynchronously with each other, but this describe and this describe do run asynchronously. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is that in order to save a little bit of effort over here to clean up some of this stuff, I'm actually going to set a before each. In which we initialize the request and response with brand new objects and create a clean Express app for each of these. Not only am I going to be doing that, I'm also going to be doing AppSet logger, and I'm just going to give it a Winston object, okay? Which means that I need to const Winston yes, lovely. Okay, great. So let's try this again. Const request. Oh, let. We don't need this anymore. We don't need that anymore. And we don't need that anymore. All right, we've got our test back. Okay. The last thing that we're going to do now is we're going to let's see. So of course it does do the call, right? So we know that it does an app.get. Just to make sure that our tests fail under the correct circumstances, I'm going to and that we're testing what we think we're testing. This should fail. So right. So if get is truly being called, we should actually now get a failing test. So I just want to validate that we're testing what we think we're testing. Nope. See? I'm running into issues because I don't know how to properly mock a method that returns a promise. So that'll have to be an effort for another time. Okay. So what I tried to show you guys in what turned into far too much time was how to create the Express app, how to create middleware, how to go about testing the middleware, testing its behavior, and using the App Express object as a service container, and how to also deal with mocking requests and responses in our unit tests for our middleware. Thanks for joining me.